My name is Ben Burgis. I am the author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left, and one of four co-authors of Myth and Mayhem, a leftist critique of Jordan Peterson. The other authors are Matt McIness, Conrad Hamilton, and Marian Trejo. There's also an introduction by Slavoj Žižek. And both of those books are out now from Zero Books. You should go check them out. Also, if you like the work that I do and want to support me, help me do it, then one thing you could do is go to my Patreon. That's patreon.com/Ben Burgis, BenBurgis, and sign up there. It's $5 a month. There's only one tier. You get 2 essays a week and also regular Discord office hours, voice chats. Also, I'm at 98 patrons right now, and I recently said on Twitter that if I got up to 100, I would do the literary equivalent of eating a bowl of spiders and read Glenn Beck's book about socialism. So if you want to force me to do that and get my thoughts about that, again, could head over to Patreon, but end of the pitch for that. What I actually want to talk about today is a subject even more unpleasant than Glenn Beck, which is the pandemic and especially libertarian and right-wing responses to the pandemic. Because this has come up in two interesting ways lately. One of which is an exchange I had with one Gavin McInness, founder of the Proud Boys, which is an organization of idiotic right-wing thugs that was most recently in the news for blocking an intersection at the entrance to Sparrow Hospital in my hometown of Lansing. And McInness calls himself a libertarian, although honestly I think he's a libertarian the way Franco was a libertarian. But in any case, I recently had a chance to talk to him, and I thought I would ask him about how his commitment to free markets would play out in the context of the pandemic, and here's how the conversation went. So I've seen you quoted as calling yourself a libertarian and a fiscal conservative, and I'm just wondering about how you think the free market left to its own devices would be at all adequate to what's going on right now with the coronavirus.
The free market, it's a tricky question because we're in this freak occurrence that has never happened before, a pandemic. And if we start running societies based on the 1 in a million bubonic plague chance, then we're going to live in a totalitarian state of fear. So you're lucky you called during a pandemic, because this is when it's one of the only times the government seems to be helping. But what are they doing? I mean, I read an article today that said that it peaks at 40 days and it dies at 70 days. No matter what you do. If we had no rules whatsoever and no cops, people would start seeing that they're getting contagious. They go, I went to that restaurant, they got sick, my neighbor's sick, I'm not going to restaurants anymore. I believe they would self-quarantine based on their own personally calculated risk. And I think that's what we should all do now. I think old people, big, fat, disgusting pigs, sick people should avoid contact with other people because it's not worth the risk. But the rest of us would like to get back to work, please. And that's what's happening too. Like we had that caller earlier talk about Trump derangement syndrome. Trumpers going to Sparrow Hospital and blocking it. Like Trumpers are the only ones ignoring the quarantine. Teenagers, blacks, Hasidic Jews, they're not participating in any of this. Like I was driving around my neighborhood the other day and I saw 2 young people, a boy and a girl in a convertible. And when they got to the stoplight, I went, oh, that must be a brother and a sister, right? They were all quarantining. And then they kissed.
So I'm a little confused now because you said people would self-quarantine and then you started ranting about all the people who aren't quarantining. So which is it? Is everybody going to self-quarantine, or even with shelter-in-place orders, are too many people not self-quarantining? Because if it's the second one, that seems like it would strongly suggest that we can't just count on people self-quarantining.
We can't. And the government isn't doing anything about it. You go to the south side of Chicago right now, there entire black communities are not even paying any attention. And cops, the state, are going in there to break it up, and they're just getting laughed at. So the answer to your question is the state is not helping this quarantine, and they haven't really done anything. I mean,
So
have they?
your contention is that if there were no shelter-in-place orders, if there were no aid for people getting tested and treatment for the virus, then everything would be no worse than it is right now. It's not helping whatsoever.
That's correct. That is my contention. I also think you have to blow your nose. But the big picture here is that
well, that's at least an improvement over asking me my age, so fair enough.
Yeah, how old are you, by the way?
40.
Okay. See, I don't ask people their age when they deliver intelligent arguments that are worth discussing. Yeah, look, it's possible. It's highly possible that a pandemic is a time when the government thrives. A pandemic is once a century, and it is a bizarre freak occurrence, and there's no way that I am tailoring my daily beliefs, my entire political philosophy, on a 1 in a million chance.
So we shouldn't do anything to prepare for pandemics? I mean, that seems to have been a big part of the problem this time.
Yeah, well, the beauty of the free market is there's a huge incentive to find a cure. Whoever can patent a hydrochloroquine solution here is going to be rich.
So and then once the vaccine is patented, they should just be able to sell it for whatever they want, and those who can afford it can get it, and that'll solve the problem.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, you're obviously asking a very loaded question, so I'm taking your hyperbole into account when I answer. But yes, I can do the non-facetious laughing answer, which is, look, there's parameters with patents. They become free market after they've run their course, but the person who invested in the research wants to make their money back. So we try to set up rules for when they can get their money back. We have trademark laws. We prosecute people who violate our trademarks. Is that the sarcastic laughing answer you want? Is that better, Mr. Glib? Goodbye. Next.
At the end there, I tried to ask him a few times whether he thought that exactly as many people would get the vaccine if it was free as if it could be sold at market prices by whoever patented it. But at that point, he'd cut my mic, so it was too late. All right. So that's my actual interaction with people who have this position, the position of the people who have been protesting the lockdowns, most famously in Michigan, but there have also been smaller protests in other states. I believe a similarly sized protest in Wisconsin. And I wrote, obviously, as you can tell from that exchange, I think the shelter-in-place orders are absolutely necessary for the sake of public health. But as you would imagine, right, given that I am a big old commie, or radical democratic socialist, however you want to put that, I don't think that you can just tell people to shelter in place without having much more serious forms of economic assistance to help them get through it. So I wrote an article for Jacobin about this that came out last week. And I'm, capable of being provocative, but I really didn't think I was being provocative when I wrote this. I thought that what I wrote is anything that anybody who considered themselves like a leftist or a socialist would think of as just obvious, just common sense. Yeah, of course, the position that I took in the article was, of course, we need the lockdowns, right? The shelter-in-place orders. But and of course these lockdown protests are disgusting. Of course, there's an element of astroturf there. In the second paragraph of the article, I talked about how the wealthy DeVos family, which has been funding right-wing causes since long before Betsy was appointed to Trump's cabinet, was funding the organizations that sponsored the protest. So I got into the astroturf element. I referred to the Proud Boys and others as thuggish right-wing organizations. I talked about how outrageous and terrible it was to see a doctor in a white coat having to go out into the intersection to try to reason with the Proud Boys to get them to stop blocking the intersection. I mentioned that part of the reason this was personal to me is that my brother and sister were both born in Sparrow Hospital. I was born in St. Lawrence. And I used to pass by that hospital every day, right? So seeing this quasi-fascist organization doing that there, made my blood boil, which I said in the article. But I said, and again, this is the part that I would think would be socialist common sense, that you can't just dismiss the economic grievances being articulated by these right-wing thugs, because if you do, then they're just going to grow a lot larger and more powerful. Right now, it might be what I called in the article a distinct Trumpian minority, but that's not going to last unless we do something like, at minimum, a temporary UBI, because just unemployment benefits for those who even qualify for unemployment, I don't think that's at all remotely sufficient to the scope of the problem right now. I think UBI, a total rent freeze, such that back rent doesn't need to be paid back when this is all over, and taking a cue from Spain, which nationalized all their private hospitals when the pandemic started, would be baby steps in the right direction. Those are just obvious measures that should be taken. All right, so that's what I said in the article. And the title was "The Left Can't Just Dismiss Anti-Lockdown Protests," which, normally somebody else picks the title. But, in this case, I thought it was a good one, right? Because don't just dismiss it, right? Don't just have a response that starts and ends with making fun of the people participating right now, but be sensitive to the looming danger around the corner that if we don't provide more serious economic help for people sheltering in place, this movement isn't going to stay on the fringes. So I was a little surprised to see hundreds of people over the weekend, including Matthew Yglesias and also Nation magazine contributor Joshua Holland, basically calling me a fascist or a right-wing dupe or an advocate for red-brown alliances, etc., for having made what I thought was this obvious point. So Yglesias at least gets credit for having glanced at the contents of the article, although I don't know if he read it because the particular passage he found was being screenshotted by a lot of people, which was one where I quoted somebody who I referred to as a right-wing thug, right? I said, even some members of thuggish right-wing organizations are articulating these legitimate economic grievances. And I quoted him talking about worrying that he couldn't make his truck payment, etc. And even though I clearly identified him as a member of a thuggish right-wing organization, there were a lot of people who were responding by basically saying, oh my God, Ben Burgis is, is quoting this guy and saying he has legitimate economic grievances, but look, he's a fascist. Yeah, I kind of called him a fascist. But if anybody who's part of the anti-war left should get the distinction here, because this is the same distinction that the Noam Chomsky's and Glenn Greenwald's of the world were always making when they said that a lot of terrorism was blowback from U.S. intervention in the Middle East, and they'd support this by quoting various statements by terrorists talking about that, right? So the point is that if we want, the point wasn't that Noam Chomsky and Glenn Greenwald are pro-terrorist, right? Only the most Neanderthal right-wing idiots thought that. It's that they were saying that if you want to stop terrorism, you should stop fueling the causes of terrorism. And it's exactly the same distinction here. If you want to continue the shelter-in-place orders, which I absolutely think we need to do, if you want this very creepy far-right movement to stay on the fringes, then you'd better address the economic grievances that they're giving voice to and using as a reason to support their position. You better undercut them by taking away those economic arguments. I think that if you think that that's advocating a red-brown alliance, which is what Yglessias insinuated in his tweet and what a lot of other people just said outright, of course, granted, that was a minority, right? 99% of the angry responses, including from Nation magazine contributor Joshua Holland, solely consisted of quoting the title and reacting to the title in a way that indicated that they hadn't even skimmed the article, which I guess I was naive for not expecting. So Holland, for example, accused me of falling for astroturf, even though literally the second paragraph of the article was about the astroturf element. I remember one person said, but these people were, blockading the hospital. Yeah, that was literally the opening sentence of the article was about that. So whatever, that's intensely annoying, but that's just Twitter being Twitter. The Yglessias response, and the response even from some people who consider themselves to be far leftists and socialists, that, oh my God, this is fascism, this is red-brown alliance stuff, is even more depressing. And this is something I get into in the book that I'm revising right now, much more about that soon. Because if you think, and we'll just end on this point, if you think that it's somehow pro-fascist to say that we should provide better solutions to the legitimate economic complaints articulated by fascists precisely in order to stop fascist movements from spreading, then you're the reason the left always loses.
Thanks for watching this Zero Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zero Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zero Books Book Club and help us to continue making online content from the left.